Hey everybody, Vince here with the Rig Doctor, and in today's video we're going to go over pro signal paths. So this is meant to be a follow-up to our last video, which was pedalboard signal chain, covering a very generic mono signal path, guitar into pedalboard into amp, but covering every type of pedal that could be on your board and why it's in the spot that it's in. So today's video is going to cover 4-cable method and 5-cable method and how you can effectively route this so that way you can do this at home. Now I want to start off with a disclaimer. Everybody's pedalboard is different, everybody's sound is different. So when it comes to signal chain, most of this stuff is really just based on personal preference, whatever sounds best for you. Now, there are a few things where I kind of consider them to be hard and fast rules, but it doesn't work for everybody. So take the guidance that I give you, experiment with your boards, test out a few different things, put pedals in a weird spot and just see if it works for you. And I'll give you a few different options on how to route these so that way it may work better for your specific setups. So before we jump into this, let's start off with a refresher so that way you guys can see what a basic signal chain looks like so we can start off in the right spot. First up, we come out of the guitar and then we hit what we call our impedance sensitive pedals. These are our vintage fuzzes, vintage wahs, our treble boosters, anything that cannot be before a buffer. So if you have a fuzz face or a tone bender, this is where that may live. It cannot be after a buffer or it's not going to respond the same. So we start off with our impedance sensitive pedals and then we go right into our input buffer. This is really important because it basically tricks your pickups into thinking that it's seeing the loading that it would normally get if you plug your guitar directly into your amp. Now again, with our buffers, we want a 1 meg input impedance and 100 ohm or less output impedance. Those are the ideal spec. That's what we usually recommend for people. After our input buffer, we go into our tuner. Now, ideally, you want a true bypass tuner, and you can put that before the buffer or after the buffer if it's true bypass. If it's buffer, like the Boss TU2 or the Boss TU3, you want to put that after your buffer. Now, you don't want to use this pedal as your input buffer because there are multiple buffers in this pedal, and it's not the ideal spec. So you still want a dedicated input buffer for this. Now, if you have something like the TC Electronic Polytune 3 that has the built-in Bonafide buffer, something like that can serve as both your tuner and your input buffer because it meets the right spec. Now, I definitely recommend having a dedicated input buffer and your tuner separate and making that true bypass, but whatever works best for you. Next up, we have our dynamic effects. Now, this includes compression, filters, pitch effects, your synth pedals, anything that responds directly to the guitar's dynamics will go in this section. Now, the order has an effect here, but it doesn't work for everybody. To me, I think you should have your pitch effects up front, then your filter effects, and then your compression. To me, this is going to give you the cleanest possible option, so that way your dynamic effects work properly, your pitch effects are tracking from the guitar as best that they can, your compression isn't affecting the response that you'll get from your filter effects. So mess around with the order a little bit here, but I definitely think pitch going into your filter, going into your compression is the ideal order. Next up is our overdrive and distortion section. Now here, I definitely recommend feeding your high gain pedals into your low gain pedals, so that way you're not oversaturating your high gain pedals. Now the order here only matters if you're stacking your overdrives. But if you have multiple overdrives and they're never being stacked, the order doesn't matter. Now when it comes to feeding your high gain into your low gain, this doesn't mean that this pedal has a ton of high gains, so this needs to go first. It's based on how you have them set. So if you have a Proco Rat and you have it set for fairly low gain, you can probably get away with putting it a little bit later in the signal chain for the overdrive section. But if you have it cranked or you have a Marshall amp in a box type sound and you have it cranked, putting it up front may give you some better results. Coming out of our overdrive and distortion, we have our EQ and boost pedals. This is primarily so you can reshape the sound coming out of your overdrive section and use the boost as an overall volume boost instead of a gain boost. Coming out of that, we go into our volume pedals. Now, placing your volume pedal here is going to give you a master volume for the entire pedal board for the most part. You're not going to lose any gain from the volume pedal if you have it in this spot, as compared to having it up front where it's mimicking the same thing that your guitar's volume knob is doing. Coming out of the volume pedal, we hit our modulation section, and with this you have a little bit of flexibility with how you order them, but some modulation effects can go before your overdrive section. This is based on personal preference. Some people like to put their phasers, flangers, or univibes up front before their overdrive section because classically that's how it's been done. But if you like a more prominent modulation sound, then placing it after your overdrive section is going to get you that result. Coming out of the modulation section, we hit our delay and reverb, and then we hit our output buffer, and then we go back to the amp, and that completes the basic mono signal chain. Now moving on to 4-cable method, this utilizes your amp's effects loop. Now the effects loop, for those of you that don't know, is a patch point in between the amp's preamp and power amp. So if you're using the amp to generate distortion or any gain or any breakup, you can think of it as a big distortion pedal at this point. So treat it like an overdrive or distortion pedal. So if you're using a high gain amp like a Soldano or a Mesa Boogie or an Orange amp or something along those lines, you want to utilize your effects loop to place your wet effects so things don't get muddied up. Now if you're running a Fender style amp that's pretty much clean most of the time, an effects loop isn't for you. This really only matters if your amp is generating any sort of overdrive or distortion. So when you're using your effects loop, the FX send is the preamp's output and the FX return is the power amp's input. Now these are completely bypassed if you don't have anything plugged into your effects loop, but once you plug something in, now you're patching pedals in between the preamp and the power amp section. So the term 4-cable method comes from how many cables you use for this setup. So the cable from the guitar into your pedal board is number 1, the cable from the pedal board into the amp's input is number 2, the cable from the FX send into your board is number 3, and the cable from the board back into the FX return is number 4. So when you're running 4-cable method, you essentially want to consider your amp's preamp section as a big overdrive or distortion pedal. So the amp's input is the preamp's input, the FX send is the preamp's output, and the FX return is the power amp's input. So you're just completing the chain and treating your preamp like a pedal on your board. So let's break this down starting at the beginning of the signal path for 4-cable method. So we have guitar going into our impedance sensitive pedals. This is your fuzz faces, your treble boosters, your vintage wahs. If you don't have any of these pedals on your board, you're gonna go directly into your input buffer. From your input buffer, we hit our tuner, then we hit our dynamic effects, our compression, our filters, our synths, our pitch effects. From there, we go into our overdrive and distortion section. Again, I definitely recommend going high gain into low gain, but how you stack them is up to you. So coming out of your overdrive and distortion section, this is where things get shaken up a bit. So you have a few options here. You can run straight from your overdrive and distortion section into the amp's input and feed the preamp. This just places everything from the overdrive and distortion section and before it in front of the amp. Now you can also place your boost and EQ in front of the amp. You can place your volume pedal here. You can even put some modulation effects. This is just based on personal preference. It's all about how you want to run this. If you like your modulation in front of the amp, in front of that distortion, great. If you have a volume pedal in front of the amp and you back off on it, you're going to reduce the amount of gain that's being fed into the amp's preamp, which is doing the same thing as your guitar's volume knob. So if you don't want that effect, you can place the volume pedal in your amp's effects loop as well. Same thing goes for your boost and EQ. If you have boost and EQ before the amp, the boost is just going to drive your preamp harder with more gain. If you want it as a solo boost or volume boost, you place the boost in the effects loop as well. Same thing for your EQ. Anything placed before the amp's preamp is going to feed more signal or change things before it hits the amp's preamp. So whatever you place in front of the amp is going to behave differently than how they'll behave if they're in the effects loop. For me personally, I recommend hitting your overdrive and distortion section and then going into the amp's input directly and using the FX send, which is the preamp's output, coming back into your pedal board, hit your boost and your EQ, hit your volume pedals, hit your modulation, your delay and reverb, and then feed back into the effects return. Now, again, this is based on personal preference. That's how I would personally run it, but you need to experiment and see what works best for you. So in this signal path, we're coming out of our overdrive and distortion section, and then we're gonna hit our boost and our EQ. Now again, if you're using the effects loop and you have your boost after your overdrive and distortion in front of the amp, the boost is just going to push your preamp harder, so you're gonna get more gain out of it. If you don't want that, you can place it in your effects loop after the preamp and you'll get a volume boost instead. Coming out of our boost and our EQ section, we're gonna feed into volume. Now, volume in front of your amp's preamp is going to back off the amount of gain you have. If that's what you want to do and you don't want to ride your guitar's volume knob, this can be a great spot for it. But if you want to use it as a master volume for your entire gain section, including the amp's preamp, you can place it in the effects loop as well. Moving on from the volume pedal, if you like your modulation in front of the amp before your distortion, you can place that here. This can be your chorus, your tremolo, your phasers, flangers, your univibes. If you like those pedals before the amps preamp, then put them here in this section before you feed into the amps preamp. Personally, I like my modulation after the preamp, but this is totally based on personal preference. So if you like these sounds before, you can place them before you go into the amps input. Now, once you terminate the signal going into the amps input, which again is the preamps input, you come out of the effects send, which is the preamps output, and then you hit your first wet effect. In this case, again, you can have your boost and your EQ here, you can have your volume here, you can have your modulation here. It's based on personal preference, whatever works best for you. For me personally, I like to have my boost and my EQ, my volume pedal, my modulation, all in the effects loop of the amp. So it would be effects send, feeding into boost and EQ, feeding into volume, and then feeding into modulation. In this case, chorus, tremolo, phaser, whatever modulation pedal you want here. Moving on from the modulation section, this is where we hit our delay and our reverbs. Typically, you want these after the amps preamp. Now, if you're doing shoegaze or anything experimental where you want to have delay and reverb before the preamp, you can definitely do that, but things will get muddy pretty quickly. So if you want a really clear sounding delay and reverb, you want to make sure that they're in the effects loop. And again, as we touched on in our last video, the order of the delay and reverb is completely personal preference. It's just based on how you want them to affect each other. Moving on from our delay and our reverb, we hit our output buffer, and then we return back into the effects return of the amp. Now, in this case, having an output buffer here is going to buffer the signal that's returning back to the effects loop of the amp. Most effects loops, because there's no standard, are unbuffered. They're completely passive. So because you may be running a long line back to your amp into the effects loop, you may have some signal loss, even if you're using an input buffer and an output buffer before you hit the amps input. So if you are using an effects loop, you want to use a buffer going back to the effects return of the amps. That way everything's being conditioned and you're not going to have any tone loss. So that completes 4-cable method. It's fairly simple. You're treating your preamp like a big overdrive and distortion pedal, but you have a lot of flexibility in where things are in the signal chain. So you can go guitar into your impedance sensitive pedals, your input buffer, your tuner, your dynamic effects, your overdrive and distortion. From there, you can go directly into the amp input and place everything else in the effects loop, or you can run your boost and EQ, your volume, some modulation in front of the amp and get that sound as well. And then from the effects send, you come into your boost and EQ, your volume, your modulation, if that's where you want it, and then feed into your delay and reverb. You hit a buffer, and then you hit the effects return on that effects loop, and that completes it. Now moving on to 5-cable method, the exact same principles apply here, except you're running your wet effects in stereo. Now you can do this one of two ways, but it completely depends on the amp that you're using. If you're using an amp with a stereo effects loop, which is usually a mono send and a stereo return, you can get away with using one amp. But most amps do not have a stereo effects loop, so this will require a second amp with an effects loop. So how you're going to do this is essentially run 4-cable method using one amp, but run all of your wet effects in stereo, and then take the right output from your wet effects and plug into the effects return of that second amp. That's going to make sure that you're only using the power amp section from that second amp. So the preamp and power amp are being used on your first amp, and then only the power amp is being used on that second amp. So you only have one preamp in use. So you're going to run all of the pedals that are going to be in front of the amp's preamp, and then go into the amp input of that first amp. From there, you're going to take the effects send, you're going to go to the first pedal that's in the effects loop. Let's say this is your modulation. From there, you're going to run modulation, delay, and reverb all in stereo. You're going to hit a buffer on both sides, the left and the right. The left is going to feed back into the effects return of that first amp, and the right output is going to feed the effects return of that second amp. And now you can have 2 amps running 5-cable method, all of your wet effects are in stereo, and you can get a much bigger sound. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but I'll provide some diagrams for you guys to reference, so when you're building this at home, you have a guide. So let's do a quick recap. If you're running 4-cable method, you're going to go guitar into your impedance sensitive pedals, if you have any. If not, you're going to go into your input buffer from there. Then you're going to hit your tuner, your dynamic effects, your overdrive and distortion. From here, you can either go directly into the amp's input, or you can go into your boost and EQ, your volume, and your modulation, and then feed into the amp's input. From here, you're going to take the effects send, and you're going to hit either your boost and EQ, your volume, your modulation, or you can go directly into your delay and reverb pedals. From here, you want to make sure you hit another buffer feeding into the effects return of that amp. Now, if you're running 5-cable method, the same principle applies, except you're going to take the effects send from that first amp, you're going to hit the first pedal in your effects loop, and then you're going to route everything from there in stereo. You're going to hit a buffer on both the left and the right output. The left output is going to feed back into the effects return of that first amp, and the right output is going to feed the effects return of the second amp. Now, if you are running an amp that has a stereo effects loop, you're just going to take both the left and the right signal and run it back into the stereo effects return of that first amp. And again, I'll make sure to provide some diagrams in the description box below, so when you're building this at home, you have a guide that you can reference while you're doing it. And in the next video, we're going to take it a step further and talk about all the different ways that you can run wet dry and wet dry wet. And as always, make sure you guys subscribe, like, comment, share, hit the bell icon so you can be notified of any future videos, and keep an eye out for any videos that we have coming up. And if anybody needs a private consultation for any of their rigs, you can go to therigdr.com. We offer private tone consultations, one-on-one hour meetings with me, and we can cover all the different things for your rig, whether it be MIDI or troubleshooting or noise issues, whatever it may be, we can cover all of that. I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.